Okay, so I want to start this deep dive with a little experiment today.
Oh boy.
No, I know it is a bit of a cliche, I admit that, but just humor me for a second.
All right, I'm ready.
I want you and everyone listening to close your eyes. Seriously. Well, I mean, wherever you are, unless you're driving, please do not close your eyes if you are behind the wheel. But otherwise, shut them tight.
I have a feeling I know exactly where you were going with this.
You probably do. So I want everyone to conjure up the image of Tarzan. Just let the very first thing that comes to your mind pop up on that mental movie screen.
Okay, yeah, I am doing it.
Now, I am willing to bet the farm, literally the entire farm, that 99% of the people listening, and probably you too, just pictured a very specific thing.
Right.
A guy in a loincloth, probably shirtless, extremely muscular.
Swinging on a vine, maybe?
Oh, definitely swinging on a vine. Maybe doing that, that famous yodel yell thing. And most importantly, if he speaks, what exactly does he say?
Me, Tarzan, you, Jane.
Exactly. The monosyllabic brute. The guy who points at himself and just kind of grunts. The noble savage who is pure of heart, sure, but let us be honest, he is kind of dim-witted.
Right, yeah.
He is basically a human gorilla.
It is the ultimate pop culture osmosis, really. It is the image that has been burned into our collective retina for over a century now. It is what we call the Weissmuller effect, which we will get to in a bit.
Well, here's the mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are going to take that image, that massive cultural monolith, and we are going to smash it into a million pieces.
We really are.
Because we have been going through the stack of source material for this one, the original 1912 novel by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the extensive Wikipedia character biographies, the academic critiques, and the reality, the real Tarzan.
He makes the movie version look like an absolute toddler.
It is startling. We were not talking about a grunt vine swinger here. We are talking about a British aristocrat,
Right.
a linguistic genius who speaks more languages than a UN translator. A guy who literally taught himself to read cracked the actual code of written language without ever hearing a single word of English spoken aloud.
It is actually a story about genius. It is about heritage. And to be totally fair to our sources, it is also about some incredibly complex, heavy, and sometimes really uncomfortable themes from the early 20th century that we are going to need to unpack today.
Yeah, we have got a massive amount of ground to cover. We are going to look at the origin story, the wild divergence of the movies, the race and gender politics in the text, and the fact that, and I still cannot quite believe this is in the actual canon, he might actually be immortal.
That is a legitimate, explicit plot point in the books, yes.
So let us dive right in. And we have to start at the beginning. Not the movie beginning, but the book beginning. Because the lineage here is not just some random baby lost in the jungle.
No, and the specific details of that lineage are actually the core engine that drives the whole philosophy of the book. In the popular imagination, Tarzan is just sort of, well, there. He is part of the landscape.
Right.
But in Burroughs' novel, Tarzan of the Apes, his identity is incredibly specific. He is John Clayton.
John Clayton. I mean, it sounds like an insurance adjuster.
It really does, doesn't it?
Okay.
But he is John Clayton, Viscount Greystoke. Now, in some of the later movies, like the 1984 film Greystoke, they bump him up to Earl, but in the original text, he is born a Viscount. He is the direct heir to a massive British estate.
So this is not a wild child story in the sense of someone born into poverty or obscurity. This is the 1% of the 1%.
Precisely. His parents are John and Alice Clayton. They are the absolute picture of Victorian nobility, and they are sent on a mission to West Africa. Now, usually people think of a plane crash or a shipwreck when they think of Tarzan.
That is what the Disney movie did, right? A burning ship.
Exactly. But in 1912, the plot device was a mutiny.
That feels so much more visceral to me. A mutiny.
It sets a completely different tone. They are not victims of blind nature. They are victims of bad men. The crew of the ship, which is called the Fuwalda, mutinies against the captain. But instead of just killing the Claytons outright, they maroon them on a totally remote coast of West Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, they leave them with their belongings, some tools, and various supplies.
And this is where the log cabin comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because I think people completely forget that Tarzan did not start out sleeping in trees.
Right. His father, John Clayton, builds a very sturdy log cabin. He is a capable guy. He is a British officer. And this cabin essentially becomes the Graceland of the Tarzan mythos. It is where Tarzan is born.
But then the tragedy hits. And it is pretty grim stuff.
It is basically a gothic horror story for the first few chapters. Tarzan is born. His mother, Alice, mentally breaks down entirely from the intense fear and isolation, and she dies of natural causes when Tarzan is just a baby.
That is awful.
It is. And his father, well, that is where the jungle finally comes in.
The father is killed by Kerchak.
Yes. Kerchak is the leader of the ape tribe. And this brings us to the very first major correction we need to make today for everyone listening. The apes themselves.
Okay, hit me. Because in my head, they are gorillas.
Yeah.
In the Disney movie, they are gorillas. In the old black and white movies, they are, well, guys in really bad gorilla suits.
Usually rug-like suits, yes. But in the book, they are emphatically not gorillas. Burroughs was very specific about this in his world building. He created an entirely fictional species called the Mangani.
The Mangani.
Yes. He describes them as great apes, but a species completely unknown to modern science. They are larger than chimps, they are smarter than gorillas, and they have a fully developed spoken language.
That is such a crucial distinction. Because if they were just standard gorillas, the idea of Tarzan having complex social interactions and literally talking to them would be pure fantasy magic.
Yeah.
But Burroughs builds a grounded world where these creatures have an actual culture.
Exactly. They have rituals, they have a strict hierarchy, they have a language, and that is exactly where the name comes from. Tarzan is not just a random cool-sounding noise. It is a specific word.
Let's break that down.
In the language of the Mangani, Tar means white, and Zan means skin.
White skin.
Literally, yes. He was named for his most obvious physical deformity relative to the rest of the ape tribe. He was the hairless, white-skinned freak of the family, basically.
That is so blunt, but it really positions him as the outsider from day one. He's not the king of the apes initially. He's the ugly duckling of the jungle.
He really is. And Burroughs actually struggled with the name during his drafting process. Looking at his original draft notes, he toyed with calling the character Xantar or even Tublat Zan.
Xantar sounds like a bad magician you would hire for a kid's birthday party.
Or a B-movie sci-fi villain. I think we can all agree he stuck the landing when he finally settled on Tarzan. It has a great percussive quality to it.
So he is raised by Kala, the ape mother, after Kerchak kills his biological father. And this is where the story usually pivots to swinging on vines in the public imagination. But this is where the real story, the one that absolutely blows my mind, actually begins. We need to talk about his brain.
This is the ultimate Blinkist takeaway if you want the high-level summary of the original text. Tarzan is a genius.
A polymath.
A legitimate, world-class polymath, and it all starts back in that cabin.
Set the scene for us, because this is the part that I think is the most unbelievable, but also by far the most fascinating part of the original book.
So Tarzan is a young child. He is roaming the jungle. He discovers the cabin his father built. Now, the apes avoid it. They think it is haunted or dangerous. But Tarzan is curious. He figures out how to open the complicated latch on the door. He goes inside.
And what does he find in there?
He finds the skeletons of his parents.
Which is horrifying.
It is incredibly macabre. He does not know who they are, obviously. But he also finds his father's possessions, knives, tools, and crucially, a portable library of books.
Who brings a library to a marooning?
A Victorian aristocrat. He had brought books to read on the long sea voyage, and among them were children's primers, picture books. A is for Archer, B is for boy.
Okay, so walk us through the cognitive leap here. Because this is a boy who has never heard English. He does not know what a language is in the human sense. How does he go from looking at squiggles on a page to reading Shakespeare?
It is a profound testament to how Burroughs viewed the character's innate genetic superiority, which is a theme we will definitely dig into later. But practically speaking, it is pure pattern recognition. He sees a picture of a boy. He sees the little black bugs, as he calls the printed letters, underneath the picture. B-O-Y.
Little black bugs. I love that description so much.
He realizes that those specific bugs always appear in the exact same arrangement whenever that picture is shown. He deduces that the bugs represent the object.
He cracks the concept of symbolic representation.
Alone, in the dark, over the course of years, he eventually figures out the entire alphabet. He figures out grammar. He reads encyclopedias, history books, geography.
But here is the catch, and this is the part that makes the character so tragic and interesting to me. He does not know what any of it sounds like.
No, he has never heard a human voice in his entire life. So he can read you a passage from the Bible or a dense history of England, But if he tried to speak it aloud, it would just be silence or ape sounds. He assigns his own internal phonetic meanings to the letters.
So in his head, God means the creator concept, but he does not know the spoken word God.
Exactly. He is quite possibly the most literate mute in the history of fiction. And this directly leads to that incredible reveal when he meets the first civilized person, the Frenchman, Paul Darnau.
This is the scene that should be in every single movie adaptation, but never is.
It really is a shame. Darnau is exploring, he gets captured, and Tarzan rescues him. Darnau is looking at this wild man. He expects a savage, and Tarzan, instead of grunting, pulls out a pencil and paper, which he found in the cabin, and writes him a note.
A beautifully handwritten note.
The note reads, and I quote from the text, "I speak only the language of my tribe, the great apes who were Kerchaks, and a little of the languages of Tantor, the elephant, and Numa, the lion, and of the other folks of the jungle I understand many, but I do not speak your language."
I speak a little elephant. That is the ultimate flex.
It is grammatically perfect. It is highly articulate. It completely destabilizes Darnau. He is looking at a naked man holding a bloody hunting knife who writes like a university scholar.
And once that door to human language is opened, Tarzan just consumes knowledge, right?
He is a total sponge. Darnau eventually teaches him how to speak, how to map the spoken sounds to the written words he already knows so well. And here's a fun fact. Tarzan actually learns to speak French first.
Because Darnau is French.
Right. So for a while, Tarzan speaks Manganian French, then he learns English, and then the list just gets ridiculous.
Give us the list. What else does he learn?
By the later books, the canon states he is fully fluent in French, English, Finnish, Dutch, German, Swahili, and Arabic.
Finnish. Seriously.
Do not ask me how that came in handy, but yes. And then he learns the classical languages, ancient Greek and Latin, and then the various lost civilization languages, Mayan, and several fictional languages he encounters in the Hollow Earth or Hidden Valleys throughout the pulp series.
It really changes the entire flavor of the character. He is not some nature boy stumbling confused through the city. He is usually the smartest guy in the room. He is basically James Bond in a loincloth.
That is actually a really great comparison. Cy Weintraub, a film producer in the late 50s, actually tried to pivot the Tarzan movies to that exact James Bond of the jungle vibe, but we will get to why that ultimately failed a bit later.
So we have this super genius aristocrat, and naturally a hero needs a partner. Enter Jane.
Jane Porter.
Now, in the movies, she is usually this very proper English lady. Oh, Tarzan, do be careful.
Yes, usually very British, very aristocratic herself. But in the original 1912 novel, Jane is American.
Wait, really? An American?
Born and bred. She's 18 years old. She is from Baltimore, Maryland.
A Maryland girl. I had no idea.
Her father, Professor Archimedes Q. Porter, is an eccentric scholar. They travel to Africa, and again, the pulp plot contrivances here are pretty thick, and they get marooned at the exact same spot where Tarzan's parents were left 20 years prior.
I mean, it is Pulp Fiction. You have to allow for some massive cosmic coincidence.
It is the absolute engine of the genre. So Tarzan sees her, and initially, he is basically a voyeur. He watches her from the trees. He is endlessly fascinated. He has never seen a white woman. He has never seen a human female at all.
And this kicks off the romance we all know. But what is interesting is that it is not just a story where they stay in the jungle and live happily ever after. The book goes to places I really did not expect.
No, Tarzan actually leaves the jungle. He puts on a tailored suit. He travels to civilization to find her. He literally goes to America.
Tarzan in America. It sounds like a comedy sequel.
He drives a car. He visits Wisconsin. He visits Baltimore. It is a complete fish-out-of-water story, but he adapts almost instantly because, again, he is a genius-level intellect.
And they eventually get married.
They do. And they move to England. Tarzan formally claims his birthright. He becomes Lord Greystoke. He takes his ancestral seat in the House of Lords.
So he is sitting there debating tax policy and colonial administration.
Presumably. They have a whole life there. They have a son, Jack.
Now, hold on. I remember a kid named Boy from the old movies.
Boy is a total movie invention. The studios did not want a character that visibly aged, and they did not want Tarzan and Jane to have a child out of wedlock, which was complicated by movie censorship codes at the time. So they found an orphan in the jungle. But in the original books, they have a biological son, Jack Clayton. And Jack is a chip off the old block. He eventually runs away back to the jungle and becomes Korak.
Which translates to...
a killer.
What a lovely family tradition.
But, and this is a key philosophical point to Burroughs' worldview, Tarzan hates it. He absolutely hates England. He hates civilization.
Why? He is rich, he is powerful, he has his family.
He calls it the hypocrisy of civilization. He looks around at the social climbing, the constant lying, the endless greed, the way people treat each other in the modern cities, and he decides that the savage jungle is actually far more moral.
Wow.
Yeah, he reasons that in the jungle, a lion tries to kill you simply because it is hungry. There is no malice. But in London, a man tries to destroy you because of envy or greed or spite. He strongly prefers the lion.
That is a very deep philosophical stance. It is not just I like trees and swinging. It is a fundamental rejection of modernity.
It is. So they pack up and go back. But they do not go back to a treehouse. They establish a massive, sprawling estate in British East Africa. It is a working plantation, essentially. They become wealthy, land-owning adventurers.
Okay, before we move on to how the movies completely ruined all this rich backstory, there is one fact in our research notes that I literally highlighted 3 times. The pills.
Yes. The Kavuru pills.
Please explain this to me, because suddenly we are shifting genres from jungle adventure to high fantasy.
Well, you have to remember, the Tarzan books ran for decades. Burroughs wrote over 20 of them, and as they went on, they got progressively weirder. In the 1930s, he wrote a book called Tarzan's Quest. In this book, Tarzan and Jane and their monkey companion and Kima encounter a secretive tribe called the Kavuru.
And the Kavuru have a secret.
They have developed a chemical, a specialized pill, that completely halts aging. It grants biological immortality.
And they take them.
They acquire a stash of them. Tarzan and Jane split the supply. They take the pills.
So according to the official written canon of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan and Jane are immortal.
Yes. They permanently stop aging in their physical prime. Now, structurally, Burroughs likely did this so he could just keep writing pop stories indefinitely without having a 60-year-old Tarzan throwing out his back while swinging on vines. But within the actual universe of the story, it means Tarzan is effectively a demigod.
That is absolutely wild. It reframes everything about the character. He is not just a mortal man. He's an eternal guardian of Africa. So we have this incredible, multi-layered character. Multilingual, immortal, aristocratic, philosophical. How on earth did we get to the guy in the loincloth who can barely string 2 words together?
We call this the media distortion field, and it is a fascinating case study because it happened almost immediately upon adaptation.
It was not a slow drift over decades. It was a hard pivot.
Right. There were silent movies first. Elmo Lincoln played him in 1918, but the real cultural damage to the character's intellect was done in the 1930s by MGM and Johnny Weissmuller.
Johnny Weissmuller, the Olympic swimmer.
An incredible athlete. He had the perfect physical physique, and that is primarily what the studio wanted. But the executives at MGM had a very, very low opinion of their audience's intelligence. They felt that a wild man who spoke Oxford English would be confusing, or even worse, unintentionally funny.
They thought it would look silly on screen.
They thought the general audience simply would not buy it, so they made a highly conscious decision to completely strip him of his intellect. They made him the classic noble savage. They literally invented the pidgin English for the films.
The whole me, Tarzan, you, Jane routine.
Which, ironically, is a misquote of the film. The actual scene is a bit more playful, with them pointing at each other and saying Tarzan and Jane. But the monosyllabic sentiment stuck in the public mind. Weissmuller played the role for 12 years. He completely defined the character for a massive generation of moviegoers.
And once that pop culture concrete sets in, it is nearly impossible to shake.
It is impossible. It became the default setting. Even when later producers tried to fix it, like Cy Weintraub in the late 50s, who finally made movies portraying a smart, educated Tarzan, audiences were just confused. They were sitting in theaters like, why is Tarzan talking so much? The dumbed-down version had completely superseded the real version in the public eye.
And then you have the other massive cultural artifacts that came from the movies. The yell.
The famous Tarzan yell.
I read in the notes here that Carol Burnett, the comedian, actually had a hand in keeping this alive.
It is a great example of cultural feedback loops. Carol Burnett used to do the yell on her variety show constantly. She said she learned it from watching the old movies as a kid. Her doing it on national television in prime time popularized it even more than the original movies did for a certain generation. It became a universal sonic trademark.
And the nickname, too. If you were a strong, athletic guy in the 50s or 60s, you were called a Tarzan.
Or a Tarzan was someone who was wild and unruly. There was a famous baseball player, Joe Wallace, who was nicknamed Tarzan simply because he was erratic and highly athletic. The name completely detached from the book series and became a generic noun.
So the character completely transcends the literature. He becomes a cultural archetype.
Mm.
But man, we have to pump the brakes here for a second.
Yes, we definitely do.
Because we cannot do a deep dive on a book written 1912 by a white guy from Illinois about Africa without talking about the massive elephant in the room. Or rather, the intense racial and gender politics in the room.
It is totally unavoidable. And honestly, it is critical to understanding the text itself. You cannot separate Tarzan from the era of his creation. We have to look at the academic critiques provided in our sources.
Right. Edgar Rice Burroughs was from Oak Park, Illinois.
A town that, at the time of his writing, was a sundown town.
For our international listeners, or just anyone who does not know that term, can you explain the gravity of what a sundown town was?
A sundown town was a municipality in the U.S. that practiced a form of rigid, systemic segregation. It effectively banned non-white people from being within the town limits after sunset, often enforced by violence or intimidation. It implies a community deeply retrenched in exclusionary racial ideologies.
And Burroughs basically takes that specific worldview and transports it directly to his fictional Africa.
He does. There is a very seminal piece of academic work we reviewed by Gail Betterman called Manliness and Civilization. She breaks this down brilliantly. She analyzes how Tarzan was created as a specific fantasy of the ultimate male for 1912 white America.
And what defined the ultimate male back then, according to the sources?
It was a reaction to the perceived softening of modern civilization. The anxiety was that men were working in offices, getting soft, losing their primal edge. Tarzan was the fictional antidote. He was fiercely physical, violent, and utterly dominant. But, and this is the key to her analysis, he was white.
It is the whole blood will tell trope.
Exactly. Burroughs was heavily obsessed with heredity. The underlying idea in the books was this: Tarzan is noble not because of how he was raised, after all, he was raised by savage apes, but because his fundamental genetic code is aristocratic.
Right.
The thesis is that if you put a British lord in the harshest jungle, he will naturally rise to the absolute top of the food chain simply because his bloodline is superior.
That is basically eugenics.
The sources note it is certainly adjacent to eugenics, and the way the text treats the local Africans is really difficult to read from a modern perspective. We need to look at what the book actually depicts.
The notes mention the Kulonga incident specifically.
Yes. Kulonga is a local African warrior who kills Tarzan's ape mother, Kala. Now, revenge is a standard pulp plot point, but the way Tarzan exacts it is what critics point out. Betterman notes that the text utilizes explicit lynching imagery. Tarzan hangs him.
He hangs him from the trees.
Yes. And the text describes Tarzan's ongoing interactions with the local tribes as essentially a terror campaign. He views them as inherent enemies. Betterman argues that Tarzan proves his manhood by dominating absolutely everyone, both the animals and the black inhabitants of the jungle.
He even says here in the analysis that when he sees civilized Africans farming the land, his initial instinct is to kill them.
Yes. The critics note this reflects a very specific racial anxiety Burroughs held, the idea that the European male must always be the superior force. When Tarzan sees Africans behaving in a civilized, agricultural manner, it threatens his established hierarchy, so his instinct is aggressive.
That is incredibly dark. It really complicates the fun pulp adventure vibe that people associate with the character.
It does. Mariana Torgovnik, another scholar in our source material, wrote that Tarzan occupies a strange space where he is essentially a vessel for every fear and fantasy of the Edwardian white male. He is the ultimate conqueror who owes absolutely nothing to society but naturally rules everything he surveys.
So he is a deeply complicated, flawed figure. On one hand, he is this enduring symbol of freedom, of rejecting the rat race, of physical perfection. On the other hand, he is a walking billboard for colonial dominance and racial hierarchy.
That is the paradox of the source material, and I think, honestly, that is exactly why the movie studios dumbed him down so much.
Wait, really? How so?
Because the hyper-intelligent, eugenic Superman supremacist angle is actually quite frightening. A noble savage who is just a dim-witted friend to the jungle animals is much, much more palatable to a general audience than a genius Superman who dominates an entire continent through sheer force and intellect.
It is a fascinating take. The dumb version is actually the safe version?
In many ways, according to the cultural analysis, yes.
But despite all this heavy baggage, and it is undeniably heavy baggage, the character's cultural legacy is massive. And not just in fiction. He actually impacted real, tangible science.
This is one of my favorite connections in the deep dive. We have to talk about Jane Goodall.
The Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
The legendary primatologist who changed how we understand primates forever.
She has gone on record many times stating that the Tarzan books were a massive influence on her childhood. She absolutely loved them.
I read that she actually had a childhood crush on him.
She did. She famously said in interviews that she would have been a much better spouse for Tarzan than Jane Porter was. She felt the fictional Jane was far too prissy for the jungle.
She was like, move over. I actually understand the chimps. Let me handle this.
Exactly. And if you think about it, her incredible life's work, going to Gombe, living among the chimpanzees, being accepted by them, is basically the scientific realization of the Tarzan fantasy.
Yeah.
She took that fictional premise and made it real, but she did it with deep empathy and rigorous science instead of colonial dominance.
That is a really beautiful redemption of the original concept.
And the scientific community has nodded back to that pulp legacy. There is a species of chameleon discovered in Madagascar that is officially named Kaluma tarzan.
That is so cool. But not everyone in the literary world loved him, obviously. Rudyard Kipling comes to mind.
Yes, the author of the Jungle Book.
The guy who basically invented the modern feral child genre with Mowgli, he was not impressed with Burroughs at all.
Not in the slightest.
What did he actually say?
He reportedly said that Burroughs wrote Tarzan just to see, quote, how bad a book he could write and get away with it.
Ouch, that is some serious Edwardian author-on-author shade right there.
He felt it was highly derivative. And to be fair, it was. Tarzan is basically an adult, sexualized, violent version of Mowgli, but Tarzan ended up becoming the archetype for something else entirely that Kipling never anticipated.
Superheroes.
Yes. Jerry Siegel, the co-creator of Superman, explicitly cited Tarzan, along with another Burroughs character, John Carter, as a primary inspiration for the creation of the Man of Steel.
I never made that connection before reading the notes, but now that you say it, it is incredibly obvious.
Think about the core structure. A being of superior innate ability arrives in a new environment, whether that is the jungle or Kansas, is raised by locals who are fundamentally different from him, discovers he has powers or abilities far beyond everyone else, and operates with a dual identity. Clark Kent is essentially Lord Greystoke. Superman is Tarzan.
Tarzan is the missing link. He bridges the gap between the Victorian adventurer and the modern comic book superhero.
He is the definitive proto-superhero. He even has the secret lair in the jungle and the iconic costume, or lack thereof.
So we have covered a truly massive amount of ground in this deep dive. We have gone from the fictional Mangani linguistics to the British House of Lords, from immortality pills to sundown towns, and from Jane Goodall's primatology all the way to the origins of Superman.
It is an incredibly dense text when you really unpack it. It is not just a cheap pulp novel. It is a complex time capsule of 1912 ideologies.
And that actually brings me to the thought I want to leave everyone with today.
Okay, let us hear it.
If we take the book canon as absolute fact, if we accept that Tarzan and Jane took those Kavuru pills,
which we must if we are strictly respecting the source text.
but Tarzan is still out there somewhere. He lived through World War I. He lived through World War II. He saw the complete end of the British Empire, his own inherited empire. He saw the moon landing. He saw the rise of the internet.
It is a fascinating trajectory to imagine.
So here's the question for you to mull over. How would a Victorian-born, jungle-raised, hyper-intelligent, immortal ape man view our modern world today?
It is a really gripping question.
Would he be on Twitter? Or would he look at our smartphones, our endless social media, our disconnected urban lives, and see it as just the ultimate terrifying form of that hypocrisy of civilization he hated so much back in London?
I expect he would retreat even deeper into the jungle, honestly.
Yeah.
Or maybe he would be out there leading the most aggressive, uncompromising conservation movement the world has ever seen.
Fighting for the climate. I can definitely see that. Or maybe he is just hanging out somewhere hidden with a kavuru, shaking his head at all of us.
Just waiting for us to figure it all out.
It is definitely something to think about the next time you see a guy in a loincloth on TV. There is a whole lot more going on under the surface than just swinging on vines.
Indeed there is.
Well, thank you for diving deep with us today. This was a wild one.
My pleasure entirely.
Stay curious, everyone.